U.S. tries to appease Pakistan after President Biden called it the most dangerous country in the world. Brazilian Muslims demand Harvard return skull of enslaved Muslim leader. Homegrown Instagram influencers highlight Gaza's plight. Media must be more ambitious in covering entire climate change picture. Qatar to send drunken fans to sobering up areas during World Cup. Nike, Adidas tapping the modest sportswear market. From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight. The United States on Monday said it had confidence in Pakistan's ability to secure its nuclear arsenal. The statement comes after President Joe Biden said Pakistan may be the most dangerous country in the world, alluding to its nuclear bombs. This led to a summoning of the U.S. ambassador in Islamabad. Biden made the comment while addressing a Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee reception in California last week. Pakistan's government and the opposition have spoken out in unison to criticize Biden's statement. U.S. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel told reporters that Washington is confident of Pakistan's commitment and its ability to secure its nuclear assets. Biden's speechwriter and Patel are both of Indian descent. An expose by the Washington Post reveals 15 retired American generals and admirals have worked as paid consultants for Saudi Arabia's Ministry of Defense since 2016. The investigative report published Tuesday comes after years of digging and legal battles with the U.S. government. The Post cited more than 4,000 pages of documents obtained through the Freedom of Information Act filings. It sued the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the State Department in federal court to obtain the documents. Saudi consultants included retired Marine General James Jones, National Security Advisor to former President Barack Obama. It also included retired Army General Keith Alexander, who led the National Security Agency under Obama and under former President George W. Bush. When Nike released its first hijab in 2017, it sent shockwaves throughout the sportswear industry. The launch was part of a collaboration with Muslim athletes in the Middle East, a move that kick-started a larger conversation about inclusivity in sportswear. The global modest fashion industry is expected to grow 6% year-on-year to $313 billion in 2022, according to Salam Gateway's State of the Global Islamic Economy report. The industry is forecast to reach $375 billion by 2025. Nike has gradually been ramping up its effort to reach the modest wear community. Rival Adidas also has been making inroads into this expanding market. Demand for modest sportswear has been increasing, particularly in swimwear. Both brands are now releasing more products, working closely with local communities to better understand the needs of modest wear customers. Puma and Under Armour are also attempting to diversify their product offerings by introducing modest pieces and inclusive campaigns. French cement giant Lafarge SA was fined $778 million on Tuesday. This was for making millions in payment to ISIS and other extremist groups to build its business in Syria. The U.S. Justice Department said that the company and its Syrian subsidiary actively sought ISIS's help to squeeze out competitors. The extremist group controlled large parts of Syria and Iraq in 2013 and 2014. Lafarge also paid associates of ISIS and al-Nusra Front for access and protection. The company ultimately earned roughly $70 million in revenue during the period. A Lafarge executive said that the cooperation was to share the cake. Lafarge agreed to the fine and pleaded guilty to one count of conspiring to provide material support to U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organizations. The United States warned Monday it would take action against companies and nations working with Iran's drone program. The warning comes after Russia used imported Iranian drones for deadly kamikaze strikes in Kyiv. State Department spokesman Vedant Patel cautioned against anyone doing business with Iran that would have links to UAVs, ballistic missile developments, or the flow of arms from Iran to Russia. He warned Russia's deepening alliance with Iran should be seen as a profound threat to the whole world. Patel said some of Iran's unmanned aerial vehicles being sold to Russia have malfunctioned, according to U.S. intelligence. Mohammed Usher learned the true meaning of brotherhood when he and his family were at the risk of losing the potential home of their dreams. Usher's Alpha Lambda Mu frat brothers at the University of Texas at Dallas quickly stepped in to help him and his family. Usher said their unwavering kindness resonated with him and was unlike anything he had experienced before. They were ready to do whatever they could for me, said Usher, now the fraternity's vice president of public relations. The Muslim fraternity sets itself apart through cultivating such relationships and creating a sense of camaraderie by leading through the example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It emphasizes the importance of personal and community development. Those who join the fraternity are members for life. Brazilian Muslims demand Harvard University return the skull of enslaved Muslim leader. Details after the break. Stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes.
Greetings of peace. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dawood Warnsby. About 30 years ago, I walked into a mosque for the first time here in Canada, and I felt pretty strange. The reason I felt so weird? Well, in those days, it wasn't easy to walk into a mosque and find someone else who was a shaggy-haired singer-songwriter who wrote poetry and worked professionally as a puppeteer. I had no idea how I was going to fit in culturally or creatively with this new community. I quickly realized that there was a long and rich history of arts in the Muslim community that went hand in hand with education and learning. A little while later, I came upon a magazine from an organization called Sound Vision. And they had a little blurb at the back of the magazine that said, "If you're creative, we'd love to work with you." I took some songs that I'd been writing, put them on a little cassette and called them A Whisper of Peace, sent them through to Sound Vision. I had no idea that over 25 years later, I would still be working with Sound Vision. Things have really changed over the last quarter century. Now we see tons of creative commercial Muslim artists making music and videos and film and television and comedy and cartoons. It's wonderful. But sadly, we're also still seeing a lack of educational materials for young children. Sound Vision continues to be one of the only non-profit media producers creating quality educational content for Muslim children and families. Children need mentors and teachers who are able and willing to help inspire them with wisdom, self-esteem, and care for their world. The Adam's World series has been rebooted as an app with new episodes and new songs. We have the popular Adam's World Club and the Colors of Islam classes for children and youth to attend online. And now there's a new program in the works called Falafel Dude, helping school children learn to be better citizens, better neighbors, and better Muslims. Join me in supporting Sound Vision's ongoing work however you can, so that we can continue to inspire Muslim children and families for generations to come. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome back. The Muslim community of Salvador, Brazil, urged Harvard University to return the skull of an enslaved man who allegedly took part in an uprising of African Muslims in 1835. The skull is part of Harvard's collection of human remains of 19 people of African origin, likely enslaved in the Americas. The university's Peabody and Warren museums hold the remains of roughly 6,500 Native Americans. For decades, Harvard has faced pressure to return all of the remains to their communities or descendants. Harvard established a committee earlier this year to investigate its collection of human remains and ways of returning them. Student newspaper The Harvard Crimson reported the university agreed in September to repatriate the remains. Residents and officials gathered in Ganja on Monday to honor people killed in Armenian attacks on Azerbaijan's second largest city during the 2020 Karabakh conflict. A ceremony was held near the ruins of a residential building, one of several destroyed in Armenian strikes in October 2020. Scores of Azerbaijani civilians were killed and injured as Armenian forces launched several attacks on Ganja, records show. Among the attendees were Azerbaijan's Deputy Foreign Minister Elnur Mahamadov and Turkish Ambassador Kahit Bagci. Representatives of several diplomatic missions and organizations also paid their respects. Deputy Foreign Minister Mahamadov said Armenia still denies its violent crimes against civilians in Azerbaijan. That includes the 1992 massacre of ethnic Azerbaijanis in Koljali, a small town in Nagorno-Karabakh. A report by Human Rights Watch found Armenia violated the laws of warfare and attacked civilians, Mahamadov added. Nearly 8 months ago, Yara Eid returned to Gaza after 6 years in the UK to study international relations. The 22-year-old couldn't return home to visit her family because of the 15-year Israeli blockade on the coastal enclave and travel restrictions. Eid said it was difficult watching repeated Israeli attacks on Gaza from a distance. Eid told Al Jazeera she was anxious about her family's safety 24/7. It's never peaceful there, she said. When she finally returned home, she experienced 3 days of Israeli strikes that started on August the 5th. 49 Palestinians were killed in an operation targeting Palestinian Islamic Jihad, an armed group active in Gaza. Nearly half of the dead were civilians, Palestinian officials said. Eid felt like she had to do something. She decided to use her mobile phone, go out on the streets to talk about Israel's airstrikes on Gaza. Eid has used her Instagram account to cover what was going on. She went to several bombed areas and hospitals, and her followers jumped to 40,000 in just a few days. She said Gaza lacks English speakers covering events on the ground, so I decided to use my voice and give a voice to the voiceless. The media has to be more confident and ambitious in covering the entire picture on climate change, a former Portuguese official said Tuesday. Bruno Macias, former Secretary of State for European Affairs, told Anadolu Agency the media must show how normal people are suffering from climate change. Macias said that media should not only be covering scientists' views, but also do their own work. He said scientists tell how the planet is changing, but it's the media that shows how everyday life is changing. Macias was speaking ahead of Anadolu Agency's Environment Forum set to start on Thursday in Istanbul. It is expected to bring together local and foreign non-governmental organizations, representatives of media and international groups, politicians, and academics. Qatar's World Cup chief Nasser Al Khater said Thursday there will be special zones for drunken football supporters to sober up at the tournament. Alcohol sales in Qatar, usually restricted to hotel bars, will move to fan zones and outside stadiums during the World Cup. The games run November 20th to December 18th. Qatar, a predominantly Muslim country, restricts public drinking. To control public drunkenness, the government is offering an alternative to arrest or jail time. Al-Khater, who is chief executive of the Supreme Committee, told Sky News, the sobering up zones will ensure drunk fans are safe and don't harm anyone else. Fans who end up in a sobering tent will remain there until they're sufficiently clear-headed to be released with a warning, according to reports. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
What was it like when you started this network out, when you started Sound Vision those many years ago?
You know, after 9/11, one lady called me and she says, what is your channel which I can watch? And I say, I'm sorry, we don't have a channel. And you know what she said? She said, then how America will know about you?
SubhanAllah. Anything you want to say to the people who are watching? That we had one sister who messaged that she grew up on Sound Vision. What do you say to the people who have been long supporters?
Thank you. Thank you. It is because of you we are able to do all of that. So the generation of Adam's world, you need to take it over for the next generation. And that's my invitation to you. To keep telling everybody where to watch. They can watch it on Galaxy 19 satellite, Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, or easy thing, muslimnetwork.tv, or our YouTube channel, or our Facebook channel. And with your help, inshallah, ladies, the one who called me, what channel should I watch Muslims on? Answer is here and now.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
Welcome back. Hindutva's leader's nomination to US panel draws backlash. Who is Chandru Acharya? To discuss this in detail, let's go to Edward Ahmed Mitchell. Over to you, Edward.
Thank you, Hena, and welcome to our viewers. Assalamu alaikum. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell here on behalf of Muslim Network TV. Very happy to be with you. We want to dive in now to a discussion of an international issue that is hitting close to home. There have been concerns raised about a recent appointment to the Department of Homeland Security's Faith Advisory Council. Who is this individual? What are the concerns? We want to learn about that today with our special guest, journalist Pieter Friedrich. Many of you may know Pieter. He is an author, journalist, and an activist who specializes in the analysis of historical and current affairs in the South Asia region. We're very happy to have him with us today. Pieter, let's dive right in. What are the concerns that have been raised about this appointment to the Faith Advisory Council?
Well, so the gentleman that was recently appointed just a couple of weeks ago is named Chandru Acharya. And the concerns center primarily around the fact that Chandru Acharya is presently on the board of directors. He's a director of this organization in America called the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh USA, which happens to be the American wing of India's Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, which is a paramilitary organization, a Hindu nationalist organization, which is accused of all kinds of violence against India's religious minorities. And so there's two or three things about this appointment of Chandru Acharya which are particularly ironic. So he's been appointed to this faith-based Security Advisory Council. And this council deals with issues relating to religious freedom in America, interfaith cooperation, as well as the protection of houses of worship. And yet, as I mentioned, in the case, for instance, of religious freedom, this RSS back in India, of which Acharya is a director of the HSS USA here in America, which is the American wing of the RSS. RSS back in India has been involved in seeking the extermination of Christians, Muslims who live in the country, describes them in all sorts of atrocious terms. Even more ironic is that this council of DHS is supposed to be involved in protecting houses of worship. Well, back in India, this RSS organization and various affiliates of it have especially over the past year or two, but historically as well, been involved in burning houses of worship, mosques, churches. In the past year or so, there have been multiple accounts, including one just a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, there was a mob of about 200 armed individuals that invaded a masjid during worship and beat up the congregants and were threatening them, locking up the masjid, telling them they can't worship there and trying to drive them out of the area. In the case of churches, routinely over the past year, we've seen mobs of anywhere from 50 to 100, 250, 500 people, oftentimes armed, showing up on Sunday during Sunday services, invading the sanctuary of the congregation, attacking, beating up the congregation, dragging them out of the sanctuary and into the streets. And so it's ironic that an individual who's a director of a organization here in America, which is the American wing of that RSS back in India, which is linked to all kinds of violence like this, would be appointed to a council which is supposed to be involved in protecting religious freedom. And, it's even more ironic beyond that as far as the religious freedom aspect, that Chandracharya has been heavily involved, it appears from the records, in oftentimes criticizing and dismissing, denouncing reports about the religious freedom conditions in India. In particular, most recently that I saw, he was on the record as denouncing a report from the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is an entity of the State Department, that was warning about the rise in violence against minorities, especially Christians and Muslims in India. And so to place him in this position where he's offering advice on religious freedom, protection of houses of worship, while he is actually still apparently holding an active role as a director of the HSS USA, which is the American wing of the RSS, is a little bit disturbing to say the least. So that's what the concerns have been based around.
Gotcha. Now, Pieter, tell us more about the history of the RSS, because I think most Americans have never heard of it and are not familiar with it. It's my understanding it's a very old organization that has had connections to names that we would know, including allegedly the death of Mahatma Gandhi. Can you tell us more about the ancient history of this organization, their origins ideologically in India?
Yeah, the RSS was founded in 1925, actually before India achieved its independence from Britain, from Great Britain, the British Empire. It was founded in 1925 as a uniformed all-male paramilitary organization with the specific goal of turning India into a Hindu nation, with the specific ideology and belief that India always has been, always should be a country reserved for and only for Hindu people, with ideological belief that especially Muslims and Christians are quote unquote foreign to the land, they're internal threats to the country, and they're even traitors to the nation simply because they follow a religion of their choice. They've been involved in extensive violence from very near their origins. In particular, one of the worst incidents was in 1947 up in the Jammu and Kashmir northern region of the Indian subcontinent, when they were involved in an anti-Muslim massacre that allegedly, according to reports of the time, killed anywhere from 25,000 to 250,000 Muslims. Since then, they've constantly been involved in targeted assassinations, including, as you mentioned, of Gandhi. One of the first terrorist incidents in independent India was committed by an RSS member in the assassination of Gandhi. They've been involved in terrorist bombings, especially against Muslim targets. They've been involved in pogroms, both small and large-scale massacres of 50 to 100 people, up to sometimes as many as a couple of thousand people, primarily generally of Muslims and Christians, religious minorities.
So, Pieter,
and as you mentioned, yeah, they have been connected to some names that we've heard of, and not just names like Gandhi, but the original founders of the RSS had taken actual direct inspiration by name from Mussolini and Hitler in Italy and in Germany at the time. in the 1930s as those original fascist movements were taking root in Europe, and looked to movements like the Nazi movement in Germany and pointed to it as what they saw as a good role model to adopt towards religious minorities in India.
Well, that is deeply concerning, to say the least. And again, many Americans may not be familiar with all of this history. So now, what is the concern about this group's potential influence in the United States? I mean, is it more concern you're hearing that people are worried about political influence, getting the government of our country to ignore what's happening in India, or is there some concern about violence breaking out here? We saw there were some violent incidents in England recently where it appeared to be supporters of this extremist movement engage in violence against Muslims in the area. But what do you think are the main concerns there? Is it violence, or is it just political interference in our nation?
Well, that's a good question. Is it violence, or is it political interference? Now, if I can just briefly touch on one of the deepest concerns being the presence of the HSS operating in the U.S., as well as other affiliated organizations that typically they're legally separate entities, but typically are on record operating in collaborative efforts with the HSS. The HSS, I would not actually initially ask the critics of the HSS if it is or is not connected to the RSS, but I would ask pro-RSS voices. For instance, just briefly, we have here in New Jersey, America, we have a gentleman named Rajiv Malhotra, who's an infamous pro-Hindu nationalist author. He's on record writing, and I quote, HSS is RSS's foreign name. This is important for those unfamiliar with RSS. Then, I would also ask here in America as well, Professor Walter K. Anderson and Sridhar Damle were co-authors of a kind of comprehensive history of the RSS, which was written basically with unprecedented access to the RSS back in India and written essentially as an RSS-approved history of that organization. Now, these two gentlemen, and it's interesting to note that of these two co-authors, this gentleman, Sridhar Damle, also happens to be, or to have been, actually a president of the Chicago chapter of the HSS. And they've written that, in their words, the HSS is, quote, the overseas counterpart of the RSS. They've also gone on to explain how the HSS workers here and in other countries, they often travel back to India to attend advanced training camps that are run by the RSS. And they say, quote, that the goal of these camps is to create an international pool of potential RSS workers to be assigned anywhere in the world. And then they further go on to report, as far as the associations between the groups, that HSS leaders in America oftentimes include or are former members from the RSS back in India, and also that many of these HSS teaching sessions or training sessions conducted here in America are oftentimes run by teachers who come from the RSS back in India. And as far as one last thing I would say, just kind of visual, concrete, to me, hard proof that the HSS is linked to the RSS is routinely at almost every single HSS meeting here in America. They put these pictures out on their own social media. We can see that they have on the stage featured garlanded pictures of the first two chiefs of the RSS, including the second chief being the one who had actually pointed to Nazi Germany and praised the Nazi treatment of the Jews as a supposed justification for how the RSS should treat Indian minorities. So in terms of political influence or violence. Now, in terms of political influence, yes, that's actually one of the primary concerns here in terms of any of these people being appointed to any kind of a position or being elected to any kind of an office in this country, is that we've seen, for instance, in the past with Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, who had a strong association, strong financing by members and leaders of the HSS and other organizations that are linked to it, that she, during her time in office, used her time in office to push policies that were favorable towards the current regime and RSS-BJP regime in India, to attempt to derail and sabotage congressional efforts to hold that regime accountable and to call out the violence of Hindu nationalism, and so on and so forth. And that's the primary concern when we have people like this in positions in the DHS or in any other cabinet or in any other office, is that their bias towards these organizations and towards the ideological direction that the RSS seeks to take India will override any efforts or any interest in sincere humanitarian concern about the burgeoning human rights crisis in the country there right now. As far as violence, I would say that the primary concern is linked to that political influence in terms of these people being in positions of power, in positions of political power, have great concerning potential to use that power to help prevent accountability for the violence that is occurring against minorities back in India, and to empower the regime there back in India to continue and expand its atrocities, its human rights violations. That's my primary concern. Violence being perpetrated here in America, I would say that's a very limited concern. I don't believe that we've ever seen anything like that committed by the HSS or even any HSS member in the United States or on record, to my knowledge, in any other country which has these organizations. However, what we have seen, and there's no proof that the HSS is linked to this, but what we have seen is violence being perpetrated and intimidation in the streets being perpetrated by people who are apparently obvious sympathizers of the Hindu nationalist movement in India. We saw it in particular in the past couple of months in Leicester, UK. We saw a mob of 200 plus people, armed, hooded, and masked, marching down the streets in broad daylight in a fashion that was highly reminiscent of the way that the RSS cadres marched down the streets to dominate them and intimidate the residents along those streets and strike fear into their hearts by seeing these cadres. We saw them doing that. We saw violence breaking out there. We also saw in Anaheim, Southern California, just a couple of months ago on 14 August, I believe. We saw during an India Day gala, an India Day festival at a public park, we saw a small group of protesters respectfully walking through this festival, holding placards, holding signs, protesting against the human rights situation in India, protesting in favor of defending the lives of Indian Muslims, and so on and so forth. And unprovoked, aside from the fact of the presence of these peaceful protesters, attendees at this festival began screaming at these protesters, attacking them, assaulting them, pushing them, shoving them, threatening them, calling them stupid Muslims, even though most, if not all of them, were not actually even Muslim, and then seizing, stealing, and destroying their signs. So these kinds of outbursts, combined with what we saw here in Edison, New Jersey, also 14 August, where in the streets of Edison, New Jersey, during this India Day parade, the parade was being presided over by a BJP spokesperson, while within the parade, there was a bulldozer being included with images of Modi and of the chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, the most populous state of India, both of whom are BJP members, Modi himself, of course, being an RSS member, and both of them being, especially this chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, being involved currently in this new policy of intimidating and attacking dissenters or critics or activists, especially from Muslim backgrounds, by bulldozing their homes, their businesses, and even their masjids. And here in Edison, we saw this bulldozer being included, which was a de facto endorsement of that brutal, violent policy of bulldozing these facilities of critics of the Modi government back in India, and has violent overtones. So certainly there's cause for concern there.
Well, Pieter, all of that is very concerning and disturbing. We're just about out of time, but I want to thank you for coming to the program today and sharing some of this information with us. I know there could be also concern about other appointees in the administration, so we look forward to having you back to discuss that in the future.
Yes, I would love to come back and talk about that, because this is the third appointment now to a DHS role above somebody who has some kind of link to these organizations.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, let's definitely continue this conversation. Sadly, it sounds like we will need to. But thank you so much, Pieter, for joining us, and look forward to getting more updates from you in the future. Thank you. And Hena, we'll send it back to you.
Thank you so much, Edward. The spread of Hindutva is indeed very concerning in the United States. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.